Well, my name is John. You can call me an angry old man. That's what I call myself. This is my first video, so please forgive the video. But I think the topic is important. The topic is CO2 is not our enemy, but some politicians are definitely our enemy. Now, by the way, I very much care about our environment. I do have cattle, small ranch, and I've been studying CO2 since the 90s, primarily because I'm in the air conditioning business. CO2 was then used because if you measure CO2 outside and then you measure CO2 inside, you could calculate the ventilation rate. And back then what ASHRAE was trying to do was to ventilate at high rates because we had what was called sick building syndromes, which was caused by volatile chemicals, VOCs, created by the glues in our construction materials or carpets or desks or everything. And it was chemicals. So fresh air would wash all those away and keep the air cleaner. But I don't want to get into this too much, but in South Florida, where I'm from, outside air is a heavy load because it has a lot of moisture in it. And moisture is like almost 2.5 times the work to remove than is sensible temperature. Sensible temperature being a dry heat. Okay, so back in the 90s when I started getting buildings that, because of a high ventilation rate, were starting to grow mold because we couldn't control the moisture because it was such a heavy load and it was overloading the air conditioning systems. We started measuring CO2 to try to say, okay, where's a good level for this building's air conditioning system to maintain temperature and humidity, because that is most important in an office environment, for instance, or hospital or school, a commercial facility for sure. And then that's where I picked up my CO2 meter, which here's one. I've had them since the 90s, and of course I'm an inquisitive person, so I kept wondering about CO2. And what is CO2? Carbon molecule for C, O2, oxygen. So there's 2 molecules of oxygen. All right, okay, simple enough. So now they're going after our cows, our propane heaters, fuel oil. They're going after anything that they say emits too much CO2. Pretty soon what they're going to do is limit you people, especially up north, to electric resistance heat. You're not going to be able to burn wood in your fireplaces. You're not going to be able to use your propane ranges and grills. They want to cut out CO2. And I keep wondering, what's the problem? So I hear John Kerry say, and this is what excited me beyond the point to want to do this video. I'm not in it for the money. I care a great deal about our environment. I'm very careful about what I lay down on my pastures for my cattle. I want to keep our environment as clean as possible. But I think this CO2 thing that we're chasing is complete garbage. And I'm going to go through it. So John Kerry said 350 parts per million is dangerous. Dangerous. Now, dangerous to whom or to what? So let's go through that a little bit. You know, in Switzerland has a coal-fired power plant. What they do is they sequester the CO2 from their coal-fired plant. They put it in the water, and then they feed their plants with it. Well, now I tried to find the level at which they use, how many parts per million. It didn't really say, but I heard, way over 1,000 is no harm to plants. But anyway, their vegetation produces 10 times the vegetation that it would if it were just left outside in growing conditions. 10 times. Now that sounds like it feeds 10 more people to me, but what they said at the end of the arguments, you know, the pundits who, whenever you show something of promise, they have something negative to say if it's against their agenda. And what they said was, well, that's only worth 222 cars. Like it's not important. But what about 10 times the vegetation? Is that not to say that CO2 and high CO2 levels make our plant life thrive? Well, yes, it does. And if you look that up, you'll find it. Now, maybe after I make this video, because whenever I do find something and I share it with my friends and try to find it again later, it seems to be gone whenever it contradicts what agenda they're trying to push here. Okay, but CO2. Well, I'm turning it on. It takes a little while to warm up. This meter reads about 420 parts per million in our atmosphere. Now, let's talk about that a second. 420 parts per million equals 0.4% of our total atmosphere. A 0.4 of 1%. That's not even a half of 1% is our atmosphere CO2. Now, I've seen, and by the way, I'm not going to lie here. I'm not even going to try to embellish, although I do embellish, but I don't want to embellish. I don't want to I don't have any agenda here except finding the truth. And to me, let's see here, right now I'm reading 432 parts per million. Okay? So, is that dangerous? According to John Kerry, it is, but it's not dangerous for the plants. I saw where below 350 or 340, plant life degrades. Oh, okay. And now they want to make it carbon neutral. I don't know what carbon neutral means. Is that zero? And at below 300, our plant life is going to start degrading? So our food supply is going to start diminishing? This is what I think it means. But, you know, we're on an agenda here. Let's cut off all CO2. But let's talk more about CO2. So this is what I learned with my meter. And guess what? You could buy one of these. You could walk around, read CO2, and you'll see the things I'm telling you are true. So, and you find out for yourself. You don't have to believe me, but I'm trying to tell you this because I believe deep in my heart what our politicians are doing is absolutely ludicrous and dangerous. And, you know, if I look back in history, I have to say most of our political agendas have been failures. And if this one is, what's the end result? It's going to kill the people. It's going to starve the people. Okay, so let's get back to CO2. So 1 part carbon, 2 parts oxygen. Now, what I believe happens is CO2 is 1.5 times heavier than air. It's almost that. It's 1.49 something, but it's very close. So it's heavier than air. It'll sink to the ground unless it's being blown around. But when it rains, CO2 sequesters into water very easily. And when it does, it washes the CO2 back into the earth. And guess what? Our trees are full of CO2 or carbon. All you have to do is start a fire, bring your CO2 meter over to the fire, and you'll see the level of CO2 skyrocket. Now, hopefully, you'll get little clips of this throughout the video. I don't know if you can see it. If it looks hazy out there, there's a fire burning south of us. That's normal activity around here. We've got a lot of trees, dead trees, and we have to clear up. But I smell the smoke here, and so here are some readings. 20.6 oxygen, normal. 1204 CO2. What got me here is the relative humidity is reading 85%, and I'm checking it against my better calibrated meter, and it's pretty darn close. Okay, So, CO2 is definitely present from smoke. Now, so when you burn wood, you get CO2. And where did it come from? It came from our trees. Why is it in our trees? Well, apparently our trees, our plants, our grass absorb the CO2 as its food. It's part of the life cycle. It's food. And when it absorbs it, it releases the two oxygen molecules. And guess what's important to us? CO2 don't bother us one way or the other. What we need is about our 20% oxygen that's in our atmosphere. It's around 20%. Speaking of which, did you know about 78-79% of our atmosphere is nitrogen? When I found that out, it's like, wow, we're nitrogen? I thought nitrogen was an inert gas, but it's not really, because it's part of fertilizer. I don't know enough about it, but it hit me hard that 80% of our atmosphere is nitrogen, 20% is oxygen. That leaves about, when the numbers are there, it leaves about 1.5% of all the other gases. And you know what the next gas is? Argon. It's 0.93%. After that, it diminishes quickly. CO and CO2 together, that's the carbon footprint we're talking about, is less than a 0.45 of 1% of our atmosphere. Okay, then we're going to talk about methane in a little bit, but right now methane is 1.8% of 1.8 parts per million, which makes it a 0.00030, zeros, call it 2, 0.0002 of 1% is methane. Okay, we'll talk about methane a little more. We're going to stick to the CO2 here. So we have this cycle. The plants absorb carbon, they release the oxygen, and we get to breathe. The more CO2 they have, the more the plants prosper. No ifs, ands, or buts about that. So, Mr. Kerry, is 350 parts per million dangerous for our plant life? The answer is no, it isn't. Not even close, is it? It could be 4 times greater, and our plants wouldn't care. They would thrive. I wish I could get the exact number from the greenhouse in Switzerland that uses it, but I wasn't able to find it. Although it said at 340 parts per million, plant life starts to degrade. So, Big Daddy, where do you want to bring our CO2 level? Below 340, and we'll have our plant life degrade? Is that what you're trying to do here? I don't know what they're trying to do here or why they're trying to do it, but they're doing it. It's happening, and it's happening more and more every day. Okay, so what could it be dangerous to? People? All right, well, I have clips, and I know that in measuring all those years in office environments, that at 2,500 parts per million, the activity in the office, nobody even notices the 2,000 parts per million. Nobody's dropping dead. It could be, I've seen over 3,500 parts per million. Nobody's dropping dead. What's important to us is the oxygen. So, you know, whenever somebody says, well, if you deplete our oxygen, well, duh, if you steal away our oxygen, we have all sorts of issues, don't we? So whenever they say, well, when it depletes oxygen, oh my gosh, how much does it have to be to deplete oxygen? Our oxygen's 20%. That's what we need. That's what we've become accustomed to. And remember, our bodies change to adapt to the environment. You know, if you think about going from Florida at sea level to Colorado and have to adapt to the climate and the oxygen and all that, it takes a person about 2 weeks or less to adjust to that environment. But we adjust, don't we? Okay, so we have some give and take that we can adjust to. All right, so now, it's not a problem for our plants. They love it. It's not a problem for people. They could be up to 3,000 parts per million. Oh, and you know what? When you're wearing a COVID mask, and I stick my meter in here, and I just talk normally with my meter in here, and I put an alarm of 3,000 parts per million, it goes off in short order. So the mandate of us having to wear masks increased our breathing CO2 levels. Now, what was healthier, Mr. Kerry? The COVID protection or breathing CO2 at 3,000 parts per million? Where do these people get this from? And if you ever start to challenge them, the first thing they do, which they're going to do to me, is call me an idiot. I don't know what I'm talking about. But the thing is, I have facts, okay? How do I get these facts? CO2 meter. That's a real number. I don't make it up. So I get to see what our CO2 levels is. I reached out to our politicians and begged, next time there's a presidential debate, bring a CO2 meter, see what, when the hot air is flying at a presidential address with everybody there in that room, I'll bet you it's over 4,000 parts per million. And unfortunately, nobody's, I didn't mean to say that. Fortunately, nobody's dying there at 4,000 parts per million. So it's not harmful to people, so long as we have our oxygen. It's not harmful to plants, they thrive on it. So Mr. Kerry, what's it dangerous to, sir? Oh, global warming. I can't wait to talk about this one. Global warming. Okay, so back in 1860, because I looked at it, a scientist had 2 flasks. Now, I don't know how they knew this back in 1860 and how they measured CO2 back then, but let's just assume all this is true or inaccurate. Took a bottle of air, put a thermometer in it, took a bottle of CO2, put a thermometer in it, and set them out in the sun. And guess what? The conclusion was CO2 and moisture hold heat. Well, carbon is a substance. Take any substance. Take a tree. Let the tree shine, or measure the temperature of a tree on the south side with the sun shining on it compared to the north side, and guess what you're gonna find? The tree is hotter on the side with the sun. Oh, take a piece of metal, lay it in the sun. Is it gonna get hotter than air? Take any substance, stick it in the sun, and does it get hotter than air, including moisture? And the answer would be yes. So I don't know what the big deal is, because what I do know in air conditioning is heat always travels from the warmer surface to the coldest surface. So when at night, when the earth cools down, that heat gets rejected back into the atmosphere. I don't know the big deal about that, because every substance, cars, roofs, metal, wood, roads, everything holds heat and gets hotter than air in the sun. Okay? So thank you very much for that experiment. I would agree with it completely, but I don't know what the big deal is about it. I don't think there is a big deal. And you know what kills me? So I talked to somebody who says, hey, well, do you know what the hottest planet in our solar system is? No, I don't. Venus. You know why? No. Why? Because it's full of CO2. What? It's full of CO2. Do cows do that? I'm thinking to myself. So I look it up. In 1985, the Russians sent in a spaceship into Venus. As it entered the atmosphere, it burnt up. Because it burnt up, our scientists, our lovely scientists who talked mostly out of the wrong end of their, the opposite end of their mouth, said, oh, it must be full of CO2. A warming gas. So it must be full of CO2. And then all of a sudden the next day it's because of CO2. But do we know what kind of gases are on Venus? Do we know? What could it be? It could be anything there. I don't know what it is on Venus that makes it so hot that a spaceship would burn up in its atmosphere. But do I think it's CO2? Because there's no plant life on CO2. And if you have CO2 with water, guess what? You got plant life. You know, the other thing, I'm up in North Carolina now, driving these beautiful country roads here. It's such a nice state, as many as are. And I'm looking at our roads, the country roads, and I see the trees just booming along the roadsides. The grass is growing along the roadside. So how come if I'm poisoning with all this fuel that they're carrying on about, why aren't the trees dying? And when they're absorbing the sea, they're releasing the O2. Gee, seems like a cycle to me. And it seems like a cycle that we don't want a politician breaking, but that's what they're getting ready to do. They want us to be carbon neutral. I don't even know what that means, but is that zero carbon? So we all die, except they'll be eating steaks where we won't be. They'll be killing our cows, but they'll get whatever resources they want. You and I won't. So it just drives me nuts. So now I'm going to switch over to methane. Methane, 1.8 parts per million. So when they talk about methane, to make it sound worse, I think, they talk about it in parts per billion, because 1.8, as I said earlier, would make it a 0.00018% of our total atmosphere. Now, methane is a byproduct of decomposition, which, if I understand it correctly, happened as soon as mold showed up. Because guess what? Mold defecates. And whatever defecates, it off-gasses methane, just like you and me, whether we like it or not, just like my cows, whether we like it or not. But the question is, if it's only 1.8, call it 2 parts per million for this discussion. If it's only 2, and it's been going on whenever plants degrade, whenever mold grows and defecates, whenever the dinosaurs farted, the cavemen farted, the animals farted, where is all this methane gone? It's only 1.7 parts per million. Where is it all? It's been going on for a bazillion years, a million years, I don't know how long, but where is it? Oh, so I found the website that did a study. And by the way, do you know methane percolates out of the oceans for sure? Plus, I know it percolates out of where I live, where there's all sorts of degradation of plant life going on. But it percolates out of the ocean. In fact, there's some believe that the Bermuda Triangle, those things that happened where the planes just crashed and the boats just sank, was because large pockets of methane gas floated up out of the ocean, and if a plane was flying over it, what would happen? The density would go from 1.0 specific gravity of what air is to a fraction of that, and it would lose all its buoyancy. A boat would just sink right in it. Everything would go astray. So it does seem like that's very possible. And we know out in the Pacific Ocean, it also percolates methane. So what happens to it? Well, this study says within like 40 days, I think it was, it turns to CO2. So it comes up methane, turns to CO2, sequesters back into the earth, and the CO2 goes back into the earth from which it came. As a matter of fact, why do we breathe out CO2? Did you know corn is 43% CO2? 43% CO2. That means whatever we eat, we're eating CO2, right? And I guess that's what we're doing, is we're breathing out the CO2 that we ate. Now, does beef have CO2? Well, they eat nothing but grass and corn, so I would say, yeah, there's CO2 in cattle, CO2 in deer, CO2 in pigs, CO2 in anything that eats plant life. It would have CO2 in it. Why? Because the CO2, the carbon, is in our natural growth, plant growth. Why is this dangerous? This sounds like a cycle of Mother Nature that we shouldn't be messing with. This is Mother Nature out here, people. Look at it. It's beautiful. Who is John Kerry to try to change it? To me, he's an idiot. But I feel so strongly about this topic because they're looking to change the world over it. And look, I don't like the idea of polluting our environment. I want to pass our environment on to all our children, our grandchildren, and their grandchildren. So it's important for us to pay attention to what we do and not just create a horrible environment. But I don't think CO2 is it. If we're polluting our environment, we should look elsewhere, but CO2 isn't the killer. Our politicians are, who believe that methane and CO2 is killing our planet. You know, they say the scientists, I love this, the scientists say, you know, bring one over here. I want to talk to that guy, all right? And bring his CO2 meter when he gets here, and his oxygen meter, because I have an oxygen meter too, and I know that CO2, our oxygen, is what's important to humans to continue to live. Without oxygen, we're not living. So without the CO2 or the plant life absorbing the carbon and releasing oxygen, we don't live. Who don't know this? Why are they saying? And what is, again, carbon neutral? What is that? So all this to me is baloney. And I do this only that I don't know what else to do. I don't know what to do. I've reached out to our politicians. Most of them agree. But what happens? We still keep talking about making gas stoves illegal. And you know, so what did the dimwit in California do? He said, what was it, by the year 2030 or 2035, there'll be no more internal combustion engines. Then, a week later, just a week later, California said, oh, by the way, don't charge your cars or turn on your air conditioner until 9 p.m. at night, because they don't have the infrastructure for it. So, and by the way, do you know how much they pay for a KW out there? They pay 50 cents a KW, 5 times what, little less than 5 times for what we pay between the hours of 6 a.m. and 9 p.m. So if you're charging your car from 9 to 6 in the morning and cooking with your electric stoves and turning on your electric resistance heat for heat, you know, when they do that, when they get rid of gas heat, think about the people north of the Mason-Dixon line. Gee, you know, Wisconsin, what a beautiful state, but it gets cold as a dickens in Wisconsin. Imagine when their only source of heat is electric resistance heat. Oh my God, what power company could absorb that? And then by that time, it will be 50 cents a kW. So if you got a 20 kW heater running 24 hours, that's 24 kW an hour, that's $12 an hour times 20 is like $300 a day is what it'll cost you to heat your house. Who are these idiots? They do things without thinking of the end result. They don't think past their noses. Who are these scientists? Get one here. I want to talk to them. The one that says 350 is dangerous. I want to get that scientist here. So, anyway, I'm reaching out to everyone. Please, please, don't believe me. Go buy a CO2 meter and see where you think CO2 becomes dangerous for you. It's way, way, way above 300 parts per million. If I'm correct, even at 3,000, that's 8 times higher, and we don't care about it. So where's it dangerous? Who's it dangerous to? What's it dangerous to? And it isn't global warming, because every substance holds heat. In fact, a tree holds heat. Should we cut it down to stop holding heat? Why don't we turn our roads from black to white? Maybe that would cool our earth down some. Why don't, you know what I think we need to do? It would save electricity. Roofing systems. Our roofing systems stink. And they've been the code since I don't know when. Many, many, many years. And they stink. They're, you know, a roofing system, especially in Florida where I'm from, is 60% of the air conditioning load. On some roofs, not all roofs. Some roofs are good. Barrel tile, I like them. Concrete tiles, I like them. But there's an awful lot to speak about roofs. And if we want to diminish our KW consumption, roofs are a good place to start. So, look, I know I'm rambling. I could go on and on for hours about this because I've been studying it since the 90s. I talked to a brilliant engineer one time, way back when in the 90s. And I love this guy. He's just a genius. So thank God he was an ally. So I said to him, Pete, when is CO2 bad for us? He giggled and said, well, my brother is a brain surgeon. And he says it's not dangerous until 50,000 parts per million. I went, whoa, holy cow. I had a customer call me one time because he had some environmental guy come in. They were growing mold and people were getting ill from it. Of course, when you're in a strong, heavy mold environment, when you leave it, you're free and clear again. You don't get ill from it. It's not something that attacks you forever, and all your sinus problems clear up. And so it's only bad when you're in it and you're allergic to it. But okay, he said 50,000. I thought, oh my God, and this customer said to me on the phone, oh, we were over 1,000 parts per million. You're going to kill all my employees. I said, sir, 1,000 parts per million of CO2 is what ASHRAE recommends our offices to be at, which is a very high ventilation rate. So I don't think it needs to be that high, but hey, I play along because that's what they want and we try to achieve it. If our air conditioning systems will allow it, I'm not against ventilation, but it needs to be controlled. So please, help. This is ridiculous. This whole CO2 methane thing is ludicrous. If we listen to them, they're going to kill us off. Unless that's what they want, maybe that's what they want. Maybe that's what all this is about. I happen to think it's about controlling our fuel so that when they could tax us on CO2 and limit our usage. But I don't know what it is. I really don't. I just don't get it. So please, help. Thank you very much for your time. All right, this is palm shrubs at the base. Okay, what I did here is where they're getting ready to park and take down some trees. I took a shovel full of dirt, put it in a container, and we're reading 580. This is kind of funny. There could be a critter in here nesting for the day, but the CO2 content's screaming here. Way down on the ground. Look at that, 470. Just another minute or two, and look at this, we're at 502. 506, 510 now. There could be a critter sleeping in there. I'm not going to stick my hand in any deeper, but it's going up quick, so I can smell something in there too. I'm backing off of this. There's about 15 people here, and there's the parts per million of CO2. And look, everybody seems happy, nobody's dying. Happy New Year!